Hello again. Until 10 or 20 years ago, the idea of racism was very simple and unambiguous, and anybody in Britain or America, whatever that person's skin colour or ethnic origin, was perfectly capable of being racist. There were two simple definitions of racism. I have here one of my dictionaries. This is the Collins English Dictionary, the 2011 edition. Let me see what we find here for racism. And it's a fairly standard definition, as a matter of fact. I actually checked it earlier, by the way. Let's see. Racism. Racism. Hostile or oppressive behaviour towards people because they belong to a different race. Two, the belief that some races are innately superior to others because of hereditary characteristics. So, by that definition, anyone in Britain can be a racist. Certainly, there are Indians in this country who regard themselves as inherently superior to black Africans, and also there are Chinese people who feel that racially they are superior to everybody else, including white people. Under this old definition of racism, anybody can be racist, anybody can display racial prejudice. Things have changed, though, since that dictionary was published. Let me give the example of the Merriam-Webster dictionary, very popular and authoritative in the United States. The 2019 edition of the American Merriam-Webster Collegiate Dictionary gives the following definition of racism. 1. A belief that race is the primary determinant of human traits and capacities, and that racial differences produce an inherent superiority of a particular race. 2. A doctrine or political program based on the assumption of racism and designed to execute its principles. 3. Racial prejudice or discrimination. Pretty much the same there as the Collins definition. However, on May the 28th, 2020, a young black student in the United States sent an email to Merriam-Webster asking them to consider altering the definition to include the idea of racism as entailing systemic oppression or being dependent for its existence upon an imbalance of power. Kennedy Mitchum asked that the dictionary be updated in this way when the next edition was published. This was, of course, part of the background to the death of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement. A spokesperson for Merriam-Webster agreed to consider the matter. Kennedy Mitchum was by no means a lone voice in the wilderness. This particular definition of racism has been widely accepted among left-wingers and academics for several years. Rather than simplifying and making things easier, a definition of racism which includes the necessity for it to be connected in some way with systemic oppression, as in institutionalized racism, is fraught with hazard. For one thing, adopting it in Europe and the United States will have the effect of exculpating members of any minority from a charge of racism. If a black employer refuses to hire Chinese workers because he feels an antipathy to those of East Asian origin, this could not be considered racism because it is not part of systemic oppression, but rather an individual dislike. In this way, black people, those from the Indian subcontinent, Arabs, and people of East Asian heritage, will gain a free pass for expressing detestation of Jews, Hispanics, and anybody else they don't care for. Instinctively, we feel that something might be wrong here. The latest online definition of racism by Merriam-Webster now includes this new concept, saying that racism is the systemic oppression of a racial group to the social, economic, and political advantage of another. And at once we see that in the Western world, racism becomes an exclusively white practice. The reason is simple. In both Europe and North America, it is by and large white people who are in control of the social, economic, and political systems which may be used for oppression, and so they alone are capable of racism. The definition of racism as simple prejudice or discrimination has now disappeared. For most of us, this is of more than academic interest because we know that prejudice on racial grounds is horribly common in all countries and among every ethnicity, but that it is usually carried out on a hazard and informal basis rather than as a means to inflict systematic oppression. Ghanaians sometimes speak disparagingly of Nigerians. Black Caribbeans make unfortunate remarks about Africans, suggesting that they are backward and unsophisticated. And it's not uncommon for black people to express antipathy towards Jews, Koreans, or Pakistanis. The list of such racial prejudice or discrimination, to use Merriam-Webster's old definition, is lengthy and depressing. All this has now been wiped clean, and white people alone are to be blamed for any racism which is seen.